So this is a review lesson on factoring quadratics. So the first thing I want to do is look at this flow chart, which I did modify. So if you are using the one on Schoology, I did modify it. First, a quadratic is in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c. And following the flow chart, the first thing you want to do is check to see if there's a GCF. If there is, factor it out. If not, check to see, is it a difference of two squares? If it is, factor using square roots. Okay, so difference of squares is 1 plus and 1 minus factor. If it's not, is it 3 terms? If it's no, then you're done. If it's yes, here's where I modified. Now you're going to determine, are A and C, as the first and last terms, perfect squares? If they are, then you want to use using square roots again. So I provided some examples there. So it's the square root of the first term, the square root of the third term, and then they're both the same sign as the second term. And we'll have some examples of that. If it's not perfect squares, is A equal 1? If it's yes, then you find two factors that multiply to get that third term, C, but add together to get B. So I gave, and this is where I added on again, I gave a little cheat here. If B is a plus and C is a minus, you have a one factor's plus and one factor's minus. If B is a plus and C is a plus, both of them are pluses, both factors. If B is a minus and C is a minus, you have one of each again. And if B is a minus and C is a plus, they're both negative. So hopefully that would help. And then you write your factors in as x plus and x minus, or etc. If A is not 1, then I have a process to show you when we get to some of those examples. So again, I just added a few things on there. And you can always stop the video. This part, and that part. All right, so let's do some examples. So these first 4 are going to be all no GCF and no difference of squares. So I have a trinomial. I see that B is positive, C is positive. So both of my factors are going to be positive. So now I look at the factors of 7, 1, and 7, and they do add up to 8. So there are my two factors, x plus 1, x plus 7. Let's look at number 2. We have B is minus and C is plus. So in that case, if you look at your chart above, I have 2 minuses. So the factors of 9, we have 1 and 9, and we have 3 and 3. And when I add these up, here's my 10, and this is 6. So I get x minus 1, x minus 9. Let's look at the next one. I have a minus and a minus. B is a minus, C is a minus. So I have 1 minus factor, 1 plus factor. So when I write my factors, I need to have a negative and a positive. So we have, and they add up to negative 1. So let's try negative 7 and 8, and positive 7, negative 8. When I add these together, here I get 1, here I get negative 1. So it's x minus 8, x plus 7. And the last one of this type, I have a minus plus, and again, these are going to be two factors that are one positive, one negative. So factors of 6, one must be negative, one must be positive. Oh, I made a mistake. This should both be negatives. My apologies. And you knew that. So adding these up, ones that give me -5 are -2 and -3. Okay, moving on to the next type. Looking at our flow chart, first thing we wanted to do is check for GCF. And how do we do that? It's a lot of times you're looking at this first term, and as long as there's not a 1 there, it could be factorable. And this one, now I look at all three terms, I see there's a 5, and I look at all three terms, and they all are divisible by 5. So the first thing I need to do is pull out a 5. Now the inside, it's factored just the way we did the first 4. It's a minus and a plus. So this is going to be 2 minuses. Factors of 8. 2 and 4, 8 and 1. And I add those together. There's my 6. So it's x minus 2, x minus 4. Again, looking at the first term, I see that there's a 2 there, so I check to see if I have a GCF, and I do. Factor out a 2. Now I have a plus and a minus, and I should have went back. Sorry, I'm doing that. I forgot to put the 5 in front. You don't want to forget the original factor. Now let's go back here. My apologies. Let me write that down this first time. So a plus and a minus is a plus and a minus. There are only two factors of 2. 2 and -1, or -2 and +1. So when I add these together, the first one is the one that does give me the +1. So it's a +2 minus 1. There's some examples with GCFs. Okay, looking at the next type, I see that I only have 2 terms. There's no GCF. So is this a difference of 2 squares? Yes. And all you do is take the square root. Take the square root of 1, which is 1, square root of 5, or 25, which is 5. And you have 1 plus, 1 minus. And this one, 4 is a perfect square, 25 is a perfect square. So we have a difference of 2 squares. Square root of 4 is 2. Square root of 25 is 5. So I have 1 plus and 1 minus. And the last type I want to do in this video is the type that fall into that perfect square trinomial. So if I look at the first, it is not a 1. It is not a GCF. I can't factor out a 4 out of both of them. But is the last term a perfect square? Yes. So we take the square root of the first term, square root of the third term, and we use the sign of the b. And a lot of times you will see this written as such. Okay, and this last one, again, 49 is not a factor, so I do see that 49 and 16 are both perfect squares. So it's the square root of that, and the square root is 16. And the sign of the middle term. This is part 1 of factoring.